Hey, everybody. Hey, fellow Americans. I'm here, American Isness, and I'm here to do a report on a lab that was done in California. And if you have watched one of my previous videos, I did attempt to share this information before, but for some reason my stream was interrupted, and so this is my second attempt, and I think this information is very important. So I'm going to try to do it again. There has been a lot of people are getting sick in our country, and I think people should be more careful, and I think people should be aware of what has possibly gone on in our country to make this happen. And to put this all in context on what my initial goal is, I am going to share a video of a fellow content creator, and I think he does a good job of just I'm not going to say bringing this home because I haven't given all the information, but to put into context on what it is that I'm talking about.
Truth Zone, as always, this is your host, Truth Seeker here. And New York just made it to where they could take you out of your home and put you into a camp. It's almost as if conspiracy theorists were right again. This is absolutely wild, the times that we are living in. And it's not just going to happen in one place. It's not just going to happen in one part of the world. It's going to happen in multiple areas. New York is just a start. This is everything that I've been talking about on my channel, and others like me have been talking about on their respective platforms. How they want to herd you into these camps or these 15-minute cities, whatever you want to call them, one and the same. In any way that they can possibly push their new order agenda system and put this into place, they are going to do it. This weird outbreak stuff going on can give them all of the tools necessary to do this, to bring in new restrictions. We'll just say it like that, because I don't know exactly how deep I'm allowed to talk about this certain subject on this platform. Bear with me if I speak in code with some of the words that I'm saying, but Bill Gates is at the helm of all this stuff happening. Big shocker there, I know. And they are going to do everything in their power to take you and put you into these camps. They don't want you living out in the rural area somewhere. They don't want you thinking for yourself. They don't want you doing for yourself. No, they want you to surrender to them. They want you locked away like a good little servant. And that's just one of the crazy things they want you to do. Another crazy thing they want you to do is they want you to limit your meat consumption. They want you to pretty much not eat any meat. The UN is set to call on people to stop eating as much meat. And of course, it's being blamed on climate change and stuff like that. Well, guess what? I call malarkey on that. Humans have been consuming meat for years and years and years. Protein is good for you. Now you can get protein from, peanut butter, but the fact remains, protein is good for you. Meat is good for you. And it's insane how they are just trying to place all of these restrictions on what you do, where you go, who you talk to, what you consume. It's more and more becoming a prison planet by the day.
This summit one of the whole focuses is keeping developing nations from developing. And they're doing that by handing out climate cash to the leaders. And guess who gets the most? The leaders that are best able to keep their citizens locked in poverty get the most of the UN Climate Fund, which is going to be billions of dollars. This is a perverse way of looking at it. And the meat industry, this has been not just meat, but high yield agriculture. John Kerry has said the United States has to join this. The UN has now made this Dubai summit next week focused on meat eating, and it's the United States. Their guidance actually says we need to reduce our meat eating by 90% in the United States. They're coming after it. And Bill Gates, gobbling up American farmland, has publicly stated, he told MIT Technology Review, that Americans and all Western people, Australia, Europe, should not be eating meat from cattle. They should be eating synthetic beef. And by the way, he and Richard Branson invested billions, and he's got the FDA already approving this synthetic lab-grown meat. So imagine that, someone with that kind of pull. This is an agenda. They're trying to collapse plentiful food, ration it, and they're going to turn it over to big agri corporations run by this ESG ideological crowd in the UN.
You know, Mark. And here's something else. The LAPD has purchased controversial mass surveillance software that allows police to track individuals using geolocation data. This is just more of an excuse to invade your privacy more. And it's more of a way for them to keep tabs on you, the individual, and any and every way possible that they can. They are going to track and they are going to monitor what you do, where you go, who you talk to. As we are entering the final stages, the final phases of their new order system. And their new order system is exactly like I've talked about in many of my videos. The new order system is a prison planet. It is a system designed to enslave you and make everybody be on equal playing ground, except for the people that are enslave you and make everybody the higher ups. You can go watch a movie series such as The Hunger Games, and you can see the predictive programming in that. That is just a peek into what can happen if these people get total control the way that they want. It will be a real life Hunger Games scenario. And that's what they want. They want to create these separate colonies controlled by one system.
Constantly verifying your ID can be a hassle. Sharing your driver's license, proof of age card, passport, Medicare card, birth certificate, and address details puts all that information at risk of falling into the wrong hands. But there's a solution that makes our lives a whole lot easier and our personal info a whole lot safer.
I think this issue to do with the technology and the digital infrastructure, I just want to emphasize how important I think that is. Because in the end, you need the data.
They want to track your every waking moment of your life, which storms. In 2024, they could knock the internet out for weeks at a time. I don't believe this because they've been putting the story out for years. ID system to even access the internet. So this could be their excuse to do this. Or this could be their excuse to want to block out the sun that they've been wanting to do for quite some time. There's a lot of odd and strange has certainly been one for the ages. And again to another edition of the Truth Zone. God bless you all. And this is Truth Seeker.
Okay, so that is kind of a context of where I'm coming from. I think he cleanly identified why the American population should be alerted. But he started off his video talking about the new variants, the sicknesses, and the quarantine camps. And that is the issue or the subject of this video. So I'm going to go into a news article where they explain exactly what it is that we all should be worried about.
Upgraded by the World Health Organization, tripled in the last 2 weeks. That's the latest COVID-19 variant have tripled in the last 2 weeks. That's according to the CDC. The variant, known as BA286, has been upgraded by the World Health Organization to a variant of interest. And right now, most cases have been identified in New York and New Jersey. So Dr. Bob Lahita is joining us now. He's the director of the Institute for Autoimmune and
I love the smiles of this potentially very serious variant.
Rheumatic diseases at St. Joseph's Health. Thanks for joining us. So I saw, I know that we kind of have stopped talking about COVID, but I had heard a recent report that said, particularly in New Jersey, people are still dying of COVID, and more people are dying of COVID than they are the flu in New Jersey. You would probably know better than me, but what more do we know about this variant?
Well, there's definitely been an increase in ER visits, Anne-Marie. And you know that in the Northeast, 13% of the cases is this new variant, the BA2.A6. But now that's evolving, and this virus is very wily. The spike proteins keep mutating. Right now, this variant is really as much as 15% we expect in the later part of December, early January, February. And in the Northeast, it's predominant as the infecting virus. Now, people are dying. Of course, people die every day of infections from flu, RSV, and other viruses. But we are seeing an increase in the COVID numbers, not to the degree that we saw 3 years ago, of course, but there is an increase. And, Anne-Marie, we talked about this about a couple of months ago about clumping together during the holidays with the holiday parties and all of the things that bring people indoors, such as the cold weather.
So they're warning you about death and warning you maybe against you being around your family for the holidays.
Weather. And this really is a good formula for increased infection.
Yeah, I got to admit, I'm one of those people. I got a few of the boosters, but I haven't been keeping up recently. I'm curious about, the current vaccines. Maybe this will, inspire people to get a booster shot.
Okay, you get the idea. It's potential commercial for boosters. And so there you go. So if you need any proof that is where they're headed, there you go. So here we are, and I'm right now on an article about the other problems that we're having that is coming out of China. So the WHO demands fresh data from China amid outbreak of white lung syndrome. As Chinese are told to wear masks and social distance again. The World Health Organization is requesting more data from China amid an outbreak of pneumonia in children. Dr. Maria Van Kerkhove of the WHO epidemiologist said the agency was following up with China as hospitals across the country continue to be overwhelmed. Face masks and social distancing are again being recommended in this secretive nation in a chilling echo of the early days of COVID. The country is grappling with a spike in pneumonia dubbed the white lung syndrome because of the way lung damage shows up in a scan among children that has been attributed to a rebound in respiratory illnesses rather than an entirely new virus. China has one of the most brutal and longest lockdowns of any country in the world, which the WHO says robbed children of vital immunity against seasonal illness. So the reason why your child might get sick is because the country told them to stay out of school and stay home. The World Health Organization is requesting more data from China amid outbreak of pneumonia. So here you get the idea that on the other side of the world, there's another illness that we should be, because travel, of course, is not restricted. And I'm sure it's encouraged. And so let's bring this back to the United States. And here we are in California, where they're telling us that COVID, flu, RSV, which is pneumonia might come into that category, is on the rise in California. Who knew? It's another triple-demic. So we're going to have another triple-demic. I didn't know we had a triple-demic. I've never heard that term before, but respiratory virus season is ramping up in California, prompting health officials to renew their calls for residents to get vaccinated in hopes of reducing potential pressure on health systems across the state. So this article was written by Rong Gong Lin II. And I don't see very much of an article. This is really funny. This here, I'm on the LA Times website. All right. So basically it's here in Los Angeles. And it's it's a headline. That's all it is. Great work. And so one of the reasons why that we were told that COVID was spread in the beginning is because there was a lab leak. So labs are pretty important when it comes to COVID. There was a leak in California. There was a lab in California that did not have a quote unquote lab leak, but it was an illegal lab that was not clean or wasn't up to code. And so I'm going to share this particular report on the Chinese lab that was dealing with bats and how important it is for these particular labs to be up to code.
Subcommittee on the coronavirus pandemic hearing on proximal origins that took place yesterday, Representative Jim Jordan questioned witness Dr. Christian Anderson, one of the authors of the proximal origin paper, on the possibility that COVID came from a lab leak. Let's watch.
You guys don't know whether they were doing gain of function research or not. You think they weren't. I think they were. You think they weren't. But regardless of that, what they were doing there, what the biosafety level at that lab wasn't up.
So gain of function, I believe, is where they manipulate the animal to either receive or give the virus.
Up to the code it should have been for the research they were doing.
Doing this type of research at BSL-2 using bat coronaviruses is commonly done at BSL-2. The lab work, the animal work, I should say, is done in BSL-3. Again, this is all
What level
available.
lab would you want? If you're doing the research, Dr. Anderson or Dr. Gary, what level lab, what level would you want, 2 or 3?
This would again typically be approved at biosafety level 2. However, as I said from the beginning, is that I believe, especially given everything we know based on how many of these coronaviruses we have, that this kind of work should in future via international regulations be done at BSL-3.
Should be done at a higher level than it was done there.
U.S. Right to Know reporter Emily Komp tweeted this question that was posed to Anderson and Dr. Robert Gary, another author of the paper. Did you advise the intelligence community on their assessment of COVID's origins? Gary and Anderson both said yes, the FBI and CIA.
Anderson also responded to allegations about Dr. Fauci's connection to the proximal origins paper.
The claim that Dr. Fauci prompted the drafting.
Okay, so basically, these particular labs are supposed to be handled with care. But there was a lab leak in California of similar uh, scope. And when it was found, the CDC didn't care. Now, this headline is going to tell us that the CDC detects coronavirus, HIV, hepatitis, and herpes at an unlicensed California lab. But as I report this case, you'll find out that the officials couldn't even get the CDC to pay them any attention once they figured this out. So the CDC detects coronavirus, HIV, hepatitis, herpes at an unlicensed California lab. It's more than that. They found chlamydia, they found Ebola, they found all kind of different things at this lab. And as we go forward, I'm going to show some pictures so you can see if this was to the level of professionalism that we just heard that was supposed to have been done in China. This is done in California. This particular lab is in California. The CDC found at least 20 potentially effective infectious agents at the warehouse in Fresno County. 20. Local and federal authorities spent months investigating a warehouse in Fresno, California that they suspect was home to an illegal, unlicensed laboratory full of lab mice, medical waste, and hazardous materials. The Fresno County Public Health Department has been evaluating and assessing the activities of an unlicensed laboratory in Reedley. The Health Department Assistant Director Joe Prado said in a statement Thursday, all of the biological agents were destroyed by July 7 following a legal abatement process by the agency. The evaluation required coordination and collaboration with multiple federal and state agencies to determine and classify biological and chemical contents on site, in addition to assessing jurisdictional authority under this unique situation. So I guess they're trying to say they couldn't figure out who was in charge. So that's why it was a delay. According to court documentation, city officials inspected the location at 850 I Street on March 3rd on the building for building violations and found various chemicals being stored. On March 16th. An inspection by county public health officials allegedly turned up medical devices thought to have been developed on site, such as COVID and pregnancy tests. So two things stand out to me. March 3rd, they were there, and they came back 16th and they found all these other different things. So between March 3rd and March 16th, what did that company take out of that particular building? Also, they found COVID tests and pregnancy tests. Certain rooms of the warehouse were found to contain several vessels of liquid and various apparatus. Court documents said Fresno County Public Health staff also observed blood tissue, other bodily fluid samples, and serums, and thousands of vials of unlabeled fluids and suspected biological material. Hundreds of mice at the warehouse were kept in various conditions. Were kept in inhumane conditions. Court document said the city took possession of the animals in April, euthanizing 773 of them. More than 175 were found dead. So this is some pictures of a room. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention tested the substances and detected at least 20 potentially infectious agents, including CV, HIV, hepatitis, and herpes, according to a Health and Human Services letter dated June 6. The investigation found the tenant was Prestige Biotech, a company registered in Nevada and unlicensed for business in California. City officials spoke with Sequin Yao, who was identified as the company's president, through emails including the court documents. Now, the reason why I have this name highlighted, because I have not found any arrest records or court filings for Sequin Yao. Yao told officials that Prestige Biotech moved assets belonging to a defunct company, Universal Meditech Incorporated, to Wheatley Warehouse from Fresno after UMI went under. Prestige Biotech, a creditor to UMI as its successor, according to court documents. Basically, it is the parent company. I mean, the language here is very clean for some odd reason. Prado told NBC affiliate KSEE on Fresno that those associated with Prestige Biotech were not forthcoming with information, much like the writer of this article. Court documents say they failed to provide any licensing or permit that allows experimentation in other laboratory. Okay, so in this particular article, we have no faces and we just have the outside and a box. So this is NBC. This is the reporting of NBC. This is what if I just read this is what they found in this particular place. Let's go into another report. This is from the New York Post. Pathogens labeled HIV and Ebola found inside secret illegal Chinese biolab. Thousands of vials of biological substances, including some labeled HIV and a freezer marked Ebola, were found inside a secret Chinese-owned biolab in California, which the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention and FBI initially refused to investigate, according to a House committee report released last Wednesday. The illegal lab was operated in the city of Wheatley, California, and the potential public safety risk it posed only came to light in December of 2022 when Jocelyn Harper, an observant code enforcement officer, noticed a green garden hose sticking out of a hole in the side of a warehouse that was thought to be vacant for more than a decade. So the particular city didn't even know that it was there. The last article failed to mention that. They acted like, the Chinese company didn't really know that the other company had all of this stuff. Once inside, Harper discovered laboratory equipment, manufacturing devices, medical grade freezers, lab mice, and vials labeled in Mandarin, English, and in a code that remains undeciphered. She also encountered several individuals in lab coats who identified themselves as Chinese nationals. So there's the back of the house, and here, or the back of the warehouse, and here is another room. In a 42-page report, the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, which launched its own investigation into the matter in September, details some of the shocking findings and the troubling questions raised by the presence of an apparent Chinese-owned research lab on the U.S. soil. Now remember, there was a big deal about a Chinese-owned research lab on the Chinese soil. So it's really interesting when there was one found here in California, and there really wasn't a response. Local officials spent months repeatedly trying to obtain assistance from the CDC, the report states, noting that the CDC refused to speak with them. And on a number of occasions, it was reported by local officials that the CDC hung up on them mid-conversation. Local officials were similarly unable to get any help from other federal agencies. Congressional investigations found, including the FBI, which informed local officials that it had closed its investigation because the Bureau believed that there were no weapons of mass destruction on the property. This here, my fellow Americans, is your weapons of mass destruction. These rats were specifically bioengineered to give and to receive and give COVID. So all they have to do is let the little rat go around your little neighborhood, and next thing you know, oh, California has a COVID outbreak. How many more of these labs are out there? I guess this is the pathogens labeled containers from the Wheatley Biolab. With Costas' help, CDC officials finally showed up at the Greeley Biolab and identified at least 20 potentially infectious agents, including several serious and lethal human diseases. So what were these people supposed to do? Just go throw this stuff in the garbage? Some of the potentially infectious agents found by the agency included SARS, CoV-2, chlamydia, HIV, E. coli, streptococcus pneumonia. Was there just a story about pneumonia, white lung syndrome, hepatitis B and C, the dengue virus, I don't know what that is, the rubella virus, and malaria. The CDC, however, refused to test the samples or examine the unlabeled vials even after city officials offered to pay for the testing. So here's all of the biotrash. That's your pee, your urine, and blood. The report slams the CDC's initial reluctance to get involved and its refusal to test the vials as unacceptable. In July, under a court order, local officials contracted a hazardous waste firm to carry out the destruction of the 140 tons. 140 tons of lab equipment and 440 gallons of medical and biological waste found on the site. During the process, a previously undetected freezer labeled Ebola was found. The disease has a death rate between 25 to 90% once it is contracted. Local officials and contractors reported that they found a freezer labeled Ebola with silver sealed bags found inside, consistent with how the Wheatley Biolab operators stored sensitive biological and other materials, the report states, noting that the containers within the fridge were not expressly labeled Ebola. Local officials notified the CDC about their find, and the agency responded by saying that it did not recall seeing the Ebola label. The fridge and the contents within it were destroyed without being tested, according to the report. Mm, mm, mm. So, is this proper use of a laboratory? Photographs of the Ebola label fridge do not exist, according to the report. The panel's investigation also uncovered, so basically, they tried to hide that. The panel's investigation also uncovered a complex connection between the Reedley Biolab owner and founder Jai Bei Jesse Zhu and the Chinese Communist Party. Zhu served as a corporate officer on Chinese military, civil fusion organizations, and private organizations affiliated with the Chinese government. So we know that a lot of their private organizations are affiliated with the military. So the Chinese military has a Canada ID. Now, this is a really good report because they actually show you what the guy looks like. If you look at this NPC, it's very little. It tells you that the CDC did their job. And that's all you see. Zhu served as corporate officer on a Chinese military. Also, he is literally part of the military. In July, under a court order, local officials. Zhu entered the U.S. illegally through Canada. So when people are complaining about who's crossing the border, maybe people should take them seriously and focus on all of our borders instead of just one. Through Canada, after being slapped with a 330 million Canadian court judgment in 2016 for running companies engaged in massive theft of American cattle-related intellectual property. What the heck? American cattle-related intellectual property. I wonder, does this tie into the no meat eating story? The court found that Zhu and its PRC co-conspirators made many disturbing statements as part of their plan. These include instances where Zhu, in response to a co-conspirator reference to American imperialism, replied that the law is strong, but the outlaws are 10 times stronger. Lord. The American imperialism law is strong, but the outlaws are 10 times stronger. And they may be right because I only see one person pictured and not the co-conspirators. In another instance, Zhu claimed that the fraudulent activity would help defeat the American aggressor and wild, ambitious wolf, the report states, citing private messages Zhu sent through the Chinese app WeChat. The ambitious wolf. Defeat the American aggressor. So, Lord, we got the Chinese military. This really is a military biolab, and it did contain weapons of mass destruction to hurt the American people. Why isn't this a big super duper story? Why are we worried about something that's happening all over the world? And right here in California, a lot of people travel back and forth from California. Hollywood's in California. Those people travel all over the place. Silicon Valley's here in California. All of our tech companies are here in California. And look at this. We have these people sitting right here in the deserts of California, the farmlands of California, talking about they are here to help defeat the American aggressor and wild, ambitious wolf. So they calling y'all dogs. Once in the U.S., Zoo operated under the alias David He and began to work on setting up a network of biotech companies, including the Greeley Biolab. Maybe it's Greeley. I don't know what the Greeley Biolab. It says to incorporate and to administer many of these companies, Zoo turned to an accountant tied to entities associated with the CCP. So you have the CCP ties, you have military ties, and this isn't all over the Today Show. They're telling you, oh, these people just brought in diseases into your country, and let's just talk about you getting vaccinated. The Select Committee found evidence indicating that Zoo and the associates of the Reedley Biolab were purchasing counterfeit COVID-19 pregnancy, ovulation, and nutritional deficiency test kits from China and relabeling and reselling the fakes in the U.S. as made in the USA. The fraudulent scheme, however, did not require or explain the presence of the pathogens equipment on freezers found in Zoo's lab, according to congressional investigation. So were these tests made so they wouldn't detect corona and you sitting there with COVID and the test would tell you you didn't have it, or that would be a really interesting question. What were they going to do with those pregnancy tests? Were they putting the COVID strains of AIDS, chlamydia on your pregnancy test? There is little to no market for test kits that would test for a majority of the pathogens that the Reedley Biolab appeared to contain. Really? Are you serious? There's no market for COVID tests? Let alone test kits created in an unlicensed laboratory, the report notes. Zoo was subsequently charged with federal offenses relating to fraud and false statements in an FDA-led investigation, according to the report. The House panel found that, with the exception of Ebola, the labeled vials of presumed pathogens found at the Greeley Biolab are inconsistent with the operation of a bioweapons program. So while you're locked in your house this winter time, they're going to tell you that's inconsistent with a bioweapons program. And the reason why the CDC and the FBI is because maybe they're on board. The report cautions, however, that the public health risks posed by the lab are unknown at this point and unknowable. At a minimum, the Reedley Biolab shows the profound threat that unlicensed and unknown biolabs pose it to our country. At worst, this investigation revealed significant gaps in our nation's defense and pathogens-related regulations that present a grave national security risk that could be exploited in the future, the report states. It is therefore incumbent upon Congress and the executive branch to address these vulnerabilities now before it is too late. So this particular report was pretty extensive, and so I like that. And the New York Post also did a very good job in showing us what it looked like in there. So here's your blood, your urine. That's the door. It's a large Hispanic community, so the sign was in Spanish. There's your refrigerators of all the gross stuff. I don't know what that is. There's all your fluids. There's more fluids, your diseases. Oh, during a separate probe, the CDC determined that the lab improperly housed at least 20 infectious diseases, bacteria, and viruses, including HIV 1 and 2, malaria, and SARS. Wayne Zolan, a supervisor at the lab, also told investigators that the mice had been genetically engineered to catch and carry COVID-19. The other lab, located in Fresno, initially failed to properly store hazardous materials in August of 2020 and then broke health code regulations again regarding chemicals stored at the facility in October 22. So they of course, this wasn't an upstanding lab. This was only meant to catch and carry diseases. So here's another picture of the little mices, and I'm sure those mices carried mites. There's there you go. So now we're here at the United States Attorney's Office, and one person seems to have been arrested for this particular crime. So Gia, the picture that I showed earlier from the New York Post, who so graciously showed you what the man looked like. He's also called Jesse Zhu. He's called Quang He. David He, 62, a citizen of China who formerly resided in Clovis, was arrested today on criminal complaint. This particular article is October 19, 2023, so he was just arrested. That the manufacturing and distributing misbranded medical devices in violation of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, FDCA, and for making false statements to the Food and Drug Administration. Because remember, guys, there was nothing wrong with that lab. There was no weapons of mass destruction. As part of his scheme, the defendant changed his name, the names of his companies, and their locations. U.S. Attorney Talbert said, the disarray at the Reedley lab led to the glare of publicity he was trying to avoid, and ensuing investigations unraveled his efforts to circumvent the requirement that are designed to ensure the medical devices are safe and effective. Providing materials, false information to the FDA inspectors regarding a medical device manufacturing and distributing impedes the agency's ability to protect public health, especially when these false statements relate to unauthorized and misbranded COVID-19 tests. Consumers are who unknowingly use these misbranded COVID tests ran the risk of incorrect results about their COVID status, which can lead to further spread of the virus. Special Agent in Charge Robert M. E. Waniki, FDA Office of Criminal Investigations, Los Angeles Field Office, we will continue to investigate and bring to justice those who jeopardize the health of U.S. consumers. So it looks like these people are only being charged with having medical devices. Wheatley Code. Okay, so wow. So here he is again. When he was arrested, he resisted. The Chinese national who spearheaded the secret illegal Wheatley biolab resisted federal authorities during the arrest last week. It says from the takedown to the courtroom during his initial court appearance via video teleconferencing, Zim identified himself as David Heath and was observed to have bandages on his nose and forehead, indicating that he had suffered minor scrapes during the arrest. Zhu requested to be taken to the hospital and was treated for his injuries, while the Food and Drug Administration conducted the sting operation and made the arrest. The transportation of Zhu to the county jail was handled by Wheatley police. He's scheduled to return to the court. He'll appear in person in front of Magistrate Judge Erica Grosjean. And it says that he doesn't have an attorney. So this is how they show. Now they don't show you all that gross stuff. They show you. Oh my goodness. So let's go back to the New York Post. I'm pretty impressed with them for actually telling you exactly what happened, because if we watched the mainstream news choices, we wouldn't even know. So they clipped this little news story. So let's see what they have to say.
Nicole Ziba. Nicole, good to see you, and thanks for joining us. Tell us more about this lab and how you found it.
Good afternoon. Believe it or not, I'm going to give you something you're not expecting. We found this lab by a single green garden hose that was illegally connected to the back of a building that we thought was vacant for well over a decade. So a very observant code enforcement officer who saw something that didn't look right, and she stopped to investigate, knocked on the door, and a Chinese woman in a lab coat opens the door. We pretty much immediately knew we had something there, but we didn't know what. So Reed, the California, small little town. We're 25,000 and we're nestled in agricultural farmland in California. It was a strange sight, certainly, to see at that door. After several weeks of investigation, being able to go in, I myself went in full PPE, and what we discovered, one person that was with us said a house of horrors. And I think that was an adequate description. Just shelves with vials of blood and jars of urine, opening up desk drawers to find blood and urine samples in desk drawers. It's just a bizarre sight. And then, of course, we turn around and there's a makeshift room walking inside 1,000 white lab mice and just putrid smell.
All right. So this is saying the leader of House panel looking into COVID-19 pandemic asked the FBI and Department of Health and Human Services on Wednesday to hand over records on an illegal Chinese lab that was reportedly conducting risky research. So the CDC said there is really nothing there. California is saying, oh, it's only unauthorized medical devices. But the House is saying a biolab was operating in California City. Here's what the congressional committee found. The committee's report came after a subpoena was issued in September in relation to the lab found inside an old Reedley warehouse where multiple agencies investigated a number of infectious diseases and hazardous chemicals, including COVID-19, malaria, HIV, and hepatitis. In October, authorities arrested Jia Bei Zhu on suspicion of manufacturing and distributing misbranded medical devices and medical false statements in federal agencies in connection with the lab. The committee said Zhu, a citizen of China, had also lived in Canada and accused him of transporting infectious diseases as well as stealing American and Canadian intellectual property. The committee also said Zhu was reportedly working with companies affiliated with the Chinese government and already had a warrant for his arrest and operated under an alias. So I find it really interesting when California arrested him. This is not what he was not charged with stealing American intellectual property. He was not charged with transporting infectious diseases. He was not charged with working with the Chinese government or the Chinese military. He was charged with having medical devices, improper medical devices. California reps Jen Costa and Kevin McCarthy serve on the committee and were joined by officials from Reedley. The committee criticized the slow action from federal agencies in responding to the concerns from the local officials. It further outlined the Federal Bureau of Investigations and Center for Disease Control initially declined to step in and investigate despite repeated calls. McCarthy praised the response from local officials from Reedley and Fresno County, which I do too. You know, thank God. The code enforcement worker, Jocelyn Harper, whoop whoop, joined Reedley City's manager, Nicole Ziba, in speaking to the committee on Wednesday. Ziba thanked Rep. Costa for helping gather federal agencies to investigate the lab. I'm proud of this little city for not turning a blind eye and simply kicking them out to go elsewhere, Ziba said. So let's take a small look at what and as we watch this, I'm going to wrap this all around, is that right now they're telling us that infections are up. We need to be vigilant. You need to go get vaccinated. We've also learned that New York is going to quarantine, have special quarantine areas for people. We also were reminded that there was the reason why we even know about COVID-19 in the first place, because there was a lab that supposedly mishandled their bats. And that's the reason why the whole world was infected. So the one lab leak was supposed to have led to a worldwide infection. And here in California, we found not only not only COVID, we found AIDS, we found hepatitis, we found malaria, we found Ebola, we found all 20 infectious diseases, and somehow this is all being swept under the carpet. And to confirm that, the only person was arrested was one person out of this whole operation, and he's being charged with having improper medical devices.
Stealing U.S. intellectual property. Almost as troubling were the dial tones on the other end of the phone when local officials tried to raise concerns with various federal agencies about these deadly pathogens. So here is a summary of what we found in our investigation.
2022, Code Enforcement Officer Jessalyn Harper noticed a green garden hose sticking out of the side of a warehouse in the small town of Reedley, California. The hose was a clear violation of the city's building code, so Officer Harper showed her badge and entered the warehouse. Inside the vast, dimly lit building, she found laboratory equipment, manufacturing devices, dangerous chemicals, and medical-grade freezers and containment units holding thousands of vials of biological substances. Some of these vials were unlabeled. Some were labeled in Mandarin, others in a code that no one ever deciphered. Others were in English, with names of pathogens that Officer Parker did recognize, like HIV. The city also found approximately 1,000 transgenic mice used for research of human disease, which biolab workers told them were, quote, genetically engineered to catch and carry the COVID-19 virus. That discovery...
The mites were transgender, by the way. I'm just going to go back because this whole story is just odd.
Jessalyn Harper noticed a green garden hose sticking out of the side of a warehouse in the small town of Reedley, California. The hose was a clear violation of the city's building code, so Officer Harper showed her badge and entered the warehouse. Inside the vast, dimly lit building, she found laboratory equipment, manufacturing devices, dangerous chemicals, and medical-grade freezers and containment units holding thousands of vials of biological substances. Some of these vials were unlabeled. Some were labeled in Mandarin, others in a code that no one ever deciphered. Others were in English, with names of pathogens that Officer Parker did recognize, like HIV. The city also found approximately 1,000 transgenic mice used for research of human disease, which biolab workers told them were, quote, genetically engineered to catch and carry the COVID-19 virus. That discovery kicked off a 9-month effort by the city of Reedley to address the public health risk posed by the illegal, clandestine Reedley biolab, and to investigate what had happened at that facility and what might have happened if Officer Harper had been less alert. Reedley city officials reached out to relevant law enforcement, public health, and regulatory officials about their shocking discovery. The FBI declined to investigate. The CDC refused to speak to them and, on multiple occasions, hung up on local officials mid-conversation. Finally, frustrated, city officials turned to Representative Jim Costa, their local member of Congress. With Representative Costa's help, Reedley officials finally get the CDC on site. Based solely on reading the labels, the CDC identified at least 20 potentially infectious agents, including many in risk group 2 and 3. Per the CDC, pathogens in risk group 3 are serious or lethal human diseases. Despite the admitted risks, the CDC refused to test the samples or examine the unlabeled vials containing what appeared to be pathogens or other biological samples. City officials repeatedly requested and even offered to pay for the testing, but the CDC still refused. Bafflingly, the CDC then reached the conclusion that there was no evidence of select agents or toxins, and had state and local authorities destroy all the materials pursuant to court order. Subject to this court order, and based on the CDC's refusal to test the samples, city officials eradicated approximately 104 tons of general waste, including complex laboratory equipment, and 448 gallons of medical and biological waste. Along the way, local officials who had previously not thoroughly investigated several of the freezers for fear of encountering a dangerous pathogen made a shocking discovery. A freezer labeled Ebola, filled with sealed silver bags consistent with how the Reedley biolab operators stored sensitive biological materials. Ebola has a 25 to 90% lethality rate. The CDC did not find this freezer in its search. When confronted with this fact over email, In the absence of Ebola noted in its report, the CDC still said it was not a concern unless the packages themselves were labeled Ebola and would not merit testing before destruction of the evidence. No one will ever know how many answers were destroyed based on the CDC's inaction. As the city remediated the illegal lab's public health risks, the Select Committee, at the direction of Speaker McCarthy and Congressman Jim Costa, worked with Reedley city officials and issued a subpoena that would allow local officials to provide Congress with documents and evidence. Our investigation revealed a complex connection between the Reedley Biolabs owner and founder, Jaibe Jesse Zhu, and the government of the People's Republic of China. Zhu previously stole millions of dollars of American intellectual property to directly benefit PRC-affiliated companies, actions that, per his own admissions, were done to further PRC policy and to meet the city demands of the PRC premier. Zhu is a PRC citizen who served as a corporate officer on military civil fusion organizations within the PRC and private organizations affiliated with or partially controlled by the PRC government. While in these roles, he traveled to Canada and formed dozens of companies there that engaged in massive theft of American intellectual property from a company, resulting in a $330 million Canadian court judgment against Zhu and his co-conspirators in 2016. In private messages on the Chinese application WeChat, Zhu claimed that his fraudulent scheme against the American company would help, quote, defeat the American aggressor and wild, ambitious wolf, and that while, quote, the law is strong, the outlaw is 10 times stronger. When Zhu failed to appear in court after the issuance of the judgment, a judge issued an arrest warrant for civil contempt of court. Zhu then appeared to have entered the U.S. illegally and operated under the false alias David He. Upon entering the United States, he set up a new network of biotech companies with the same PRC national board members, acquired thousands of vials of biological substances, pathogens, medical devices, and equipment found later at the clandestine biolab site in Reedley. To incorporate and administer many of these companies, Zhu turned to an accountant tied to entities associated with the CCP's United Front Work Department. Meanwhile, under the auspices of these companies, Zhu purchased cheap or counterfeit test kits for COVID tests, pregnancy, ovulation, and nutritional deficiencies from the PRC, resold them to Americans as made in USA at a steep markup. None of these relatively straightforward fraudulent activities required the medical equipment, transgenic mice, pathogens, or other biological substances found in the biolab. And keeping these materials were extremely expensive, requiring large warehouses and specialized equipment, including medical-grade freezers, to maintain. Meanwhile, while Zhu was inexplicably spending a small fortune on an unlicensed and illegal biolab facility, he was also receiving large, unexplained money transfers from PRC bank accounts. More than $2 million of various transfers over a few years. These payments also cannot be explained by his fraudulent scheme, which requires you to pay money to suppliers in China to obtain the counterfeit test kits he fraudulently resold to Americans. On October 18, 2023, federal agents of the Food and Drug Administration arrested Zhu pursuant to a federal criminal complaint. The complaint alleged that Zhu sold counterfeit or otherwise misbranded test kits and made false statements to federal agents. It is unclear whether federal officials are investigating the broader concerns raised by the pathogens found in the Reedley Biolab. That is what we know so far. Due to the intricacies of Zhu's PRC-based scheme and CDC's failure to test thousands of, quote, potentially infectious agents, we lack the ability to fully answer essential questions. Why would Zhu keep dangerous pathogens for years as a wanted man, despite the extreme cost and risk? How did he obtain apparent samples of the Ebola virus, one of the deadliest pathogens known to man? What were the nature of the large payments coming to Zhu from China? Perhaps more importantly, this investigation raises troubling questions about the state of our nation's biosecurity. How did a wanted man like Zhu operate clandestine biolabs in Reedley and other locations for years while avoiding detection? Why do present laws allow private, and in this case, wholly illegal, laboratories like the one in Reedley to purchase deadly pathogens from American laboratories without scrutiny? How did the CDC and the federal government so fundamentally fail this local community? Why did the CDC refuse to test the pathogens before their court-ordered destruction? The investigation into Reedley Biolab shows that competent and driven local public servants like Jesselyn Harper and City Manager Nicole Ziba can do great things in the service of their community. It also shows, however, that our nation is fundamentally vulnerable to pathogenic risk. The investigation has revealed that there are no safeguards, no tripwires, no monitoring, the acquisition of deadly pathogens and materials that could clearly be used for extraordinarily dangerous bioweapon research here on American soil. This must change. Everyday Americans hearing this news will ask an entirely reasonable question. How many other clandestine laboratories exist in the United States? What disturbs the Select Committee is not necessarily that it does not know the answer to this question. It is that no one does. Due to deep institutional failures and a lack of basic safeguards, our nation lacks essential biosecurity at a moment of competition with the Chinese Communist Party when we need it most. It is the goal of the Select Committee on a bipartisan basis and in coordination with other committees of jurisdiction to address this fundamental gap in our biosecurity and ensure that something like the Reedy Biolab never happens again. That is the outcome that America deserves. That is the outcome that we will achieve.
So that is a summary of the final report. I'll now recognize the ranking member for his comments and then the speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Speaker. Thank you to my colleagues. Thank you to Mr. Cadlick. Thank you to Mr. Costa, who worked with our local city officials and Reedley to bring this to our attention. And of course, thank you to our local officials who are here appearing remotely. I'll say two things that I took away from this investigation. One is that there's massive problems with our biosafety regulations where anybody, literally anybody, can purchase pathogens and on the internet. And so if that can happen, then we're all at risk. And then the second is we need to make sure that the CDC and other federal actors have the tools, the authorities they need to proactively make sure that something like this Reedley situation doesn't occur.
So is he suggesting that the CDC had no authority to test pathogens? Get out of here. They also implied, as I noted before, that he is not being charged for the broader scope of the crime. He's only being charged. He's getting a slap on the wrist. This wanted criminal military who is making threats. Everybody talks about, these guys from the East might be in the middle. If that particular person was talking about they need to get the American wolf, I think there were maybe a bigger outroar. I'm just saying, maybe I don't know if there's colorism going on here or what. Why is there such a passive response when it comes to the PCC? So I just want to thank you for listening to me. Thank you for sticking through this. I know it was a lot of information, but I think that somebody needs to put it all together. I didn't see anybody putting it all together for people to understand that there was a biolab leak in China, but there was one that could have been worse here in the United States. And, we see all this, swoozy stuff going on here with what happened in China. But I want to know what happened to the same lab leak in America, and why is it that they're telling us that, the potential harm is unknown? The harm that it could have caused or may cause is unknown. So again, I thank you. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you wanted to find the sources that I use for this particular stream, I have a Substack, the American Mom newsletter, and I just thank you very much, and have a great day. Keep and stay safe.